It's not actually Thursday, the 5th of March, but you all knew that, right? I know they changed the clocks, but it wasn't that bad. Okay, so I'm filling in actually for Professor Colin Wright, who is sitting right over there. And the work that I'll be talking about is about the National System for Cyber Infrastructure in South Africa. Just a second, please. Okay. This was a bad time for you to try to do that, computer. Sorry for that delay. Is there a pointer on here? No. All right, so the title of the presentation is that NICIS, as we like to call it, which is organized in the CSIR, may become a stepping stone to a cyber infrastructure commons. So this is the outline of the presentation. We speak about the commons as if there is one, but there isn't really one. There are several of them. And I need to reset your minds a little bit to explain what we really mean by an infrastructure commons. So we're going to speak about certain kinds of commons and what we mean by them. All right. Then I'm going to go through what we mean about open and why this is such an ingrained idea in the commons, and go into detail about how these ideas have been implemented in terms of a system in South Africa to encourage open science in an ecosystem. The final part of the presentation is going to be about the implications. Obviously, it's not of great interest to this audience about the specific things that we're doing in South Africa, but what this really means for the region and for the world at large. So what does it mean to be a commons? This is the question that we ask. And you hear a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of, if you just Google the word commons, you'll find a lot of different things until you really understand what you're looking for. So the signal that I'm trying to give through here, I hope will come through at the end of the presentation. First thing that you do if you want to find out something is you go to the internet and you say, dear internet, please tell me what the commons is. So Google's got a lovely ontological engine. And if you ask it what the commons means, it tells you this. Unfortunately, it's pretty biased towards English, but I don't think that's such a bad thing. But it highlights something here. It says that the commons means that you belong to the whole or affecting a community. So there's a sense of a group. Another famous commons is the Creative Commons. So the Creative Commons mission over there says that the Creative Commons is started to help you share knowledge and creativity, but it's also digital infrastructure which develops, supports, and stewards creativity. So that's a different kind of commons. The other commons that we all know is the Wikimedia Foundation. The Wikipedia is a commons. And Wikimedia Foundation in particular is a database to which anybody can contribute. Functional word there being anyone. So what about Flickr? Flickr is another quite a big commons, and they have a project called the Flickr Commons, which has its goal to share hidden treasures. So now you've got this idea of sharing and about discovering new things, which were always there but you didn't know about. I'm from Cape Town, and this is our commons. This is the Rondebosch Commons. And what this is a piece of land that was never developed. It was left as part of the city for everybody to use. And so that's what we mean in terms of a commons. In fact, it's not that it's not used or not developed. It's used by different people in different ways. So there's a running club which uses the commons to go running. If there was a shopping mall there, they couldn't go running. Schools use the commons to teach young kids about nature and about the world around them. And they couldn't do that, of course, if there was a highway running through there, which wouldn't be a commons. So what is a commons anyway? Well, it's not a thing. It's an idea and a couple of ideas which we're trying to extract value from. Okay? The most important one being that anyone can contribute, and this idea of sharing. Now let's come to the specific distillation of these ideas in terms of research. So what about the commons, openness, and science? What do these things have in common? Some might argue that you can't do science unless there's some openness involved in it. Maybe the entire process has to be open. So this equation of science with openness has been gone back a long time, and it's not true for all cases, but you'll be hard-pressed to find somebody who will argue that science cannot be open or should not be open. It's only a small set of examples which are against this general rule. Right, so I refer here to three things which I used for inspiration. The first being this open book. It was written and contributed to by anybody, and it tells people how to open science. So you can fork this book, contribute to it. It's a completely open source book, and you can find it on GitHub. The other organization I wanted to refer to was the Open Science Commons, which was recently started. And of course, the collaboration EGI, which we've been working with, which is one of the infrastructures which actually enables openness via the services that it offers. Okay, so that's the ideas of the commons and openness. But there's another word in the title of my presentation, and that was a system, National Infrastructure System. Okay, I have two small kids and they love Lego, and the only difference between the top and the bottom of this picture is order. They're exactly the same blocks. They're just organized in different ways, right? So this idea that order, it actually enables creativity is something that's not expressed often. This mess over there is not a good place for people to be creative. However, if you provide ways to combine these things in a certain order, you can actually make a very creative environment. I like to consider e-infrastructure as a complex adaptive system. And this definition of a complex adaptive system comes from Wikipedia, but it's got a couple of elements which I'll leave you to read through, it's on the web, that really map very nicely onto the activities that we're trying to do. First of all, there's many elements, they interact with each other, there is self-interaction, and the system has a history. So let's use these concepts, openness and the commons, things as a system, and how we're trying to design a national integrated cyber infrastructure system in South Africa. Okay, so you've seen most of the content from Colin already. I'm going to skip through the deep details of them. Basically, we want to say that by giving order to the system at the bottom, in other words, we will make an environment where it's possible to collaborate at an infrastructure level between the computing, network, and data components. We'll be able to allow other people using this infrastructure to express their creativity in terms of scientific research. But this requires a certain amount of planning, okay? It seems that the screen is cutting things off here, so I'll read it for you. The principles of this is that there has to be cross-cutting activities, joint planning and budgeting between the various components. There has to be governance of these things, which cannot only come from within the infrastructure, but should be mandated to the infrastructure from the users, the user community, and the people who are contributing towards this commons. So this structure came out of the recommendations of a full review, which was undertaken in 2012, and the review was published at the end of 2013. And we have now started to implement the recommendations of these to build a system for cyber infrastructure in South Africa. The first great win that we had was the collaboration between the university network and the National Research Network, which is now one South African National Research Network for research and education. You see there the logos of SANRAN and TENET. So there's an MOU between these two entities which allow them to collaborate with each other to provide the services to users without friction. In terms of compute components, there's a central component in terms of the Center for High Performance Computing, which itself has very specific resources. So it's got very specific hardware. It can run very specific workloads. But this is contributed to by a distributed computing environment, which was previously known as SA Grid. Okay, so the interaction between these things is now trying to be taken into account in terms of a system instead of in an ad hoc way. The most important aspect, I think, is that of data. And I think this picture captures the idea of what we're trying to do beautifully. A tree will die without roots, but a tree will also die without leaves. So you have to connect those two things, and you do that with the trunk of the tree, which is DRISA, the Data-Intensive Research Infrastructure for South Africa, which, yes, provides storage and certain physical resources, but it provides the ways to connect the nutrients from the roots to the leaves, and vice versa. So leaves being the researchers, and the nutrients being the developers and the people who are trying to develop new systems and new services. So we talked about concepts, we talked about infrastructure in terms of the components of it, but what about the people? People are the things which publish papers, which go to governments, which actually eat and talk and live. So what's happening to the people and their ideas about these things? I took my inspiration in the beginning of last year from a book that I really adore by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry called Terre des Hommes. You probably know who he is. He wrote this book in terms of his many adventures in North Africa. And the idea was that men live in the earth, and the men have to cultivate, men being mankind, have to cultivate the earth towards their image. We often get sidetracked. Nous sommes tous des jeunes barbares qui nous jouent meuf émerveille encore. We love our little things, and we love to play with them, but that's not why we build them. There's a difference between the person who conquers a new country and tries to live in a new country, le colon et le soldat. Pour le colonial qui fonde un empire, le sens de la vie est conquérir. Le soldat méprise le colon. Mais le but de cette conquête n'était pas l'établissement de ce colon. The idea of starting a colony wasn't to destroy, it was to build something for a place for people to live. La vérité pour l'un fut de le bâtir, elle est pour l'autre de l'habiter. And we, the people, the scientists, have to live in a commons, and we're trying to build something that will be good for us. Nous étions autrefois en contact avec une usine compliquée. We've heard about science gateways and the various technologies and all these things. It's complicated. This is like the factory which we used to see. No one knows where the phone comes from. No one sees the production of these things. Au-delà de l'utile et à travers de lui, c'est la vieille nature, nous-mêmes, que nous retrouvons, celle du jardinier, du navigateur ou du poète. And these are the things which scientists want to be. They don't want to be technical people. They want to express themselves in terms of what their science is. So we try to build something which looks like that, which respects our human nature. And I think that the most interesting analogy is that of an exchange. By developing interoperability, so by developing technical standards which allow easy access to common interfaces, we can do that. And this is done technically by the exchange of operating level agreements and service level agreements. I'm sorry to bore you with the details, but this is the work that we did with the project. You can relieve the communities by running certain services which are cross-cutting for them, and we call these core services, which we actually run in terms of the Africa-Arabia Regional Operations Center, which are doing the things which are not necessarily related to the scientific activity, like accounting and monitoring and identity and service federations. But this allows specialization, so not everybody has to run their own accounting system, but they can build on something which does their kind of accounting. And when you have specialization, you can have a market, and people can barter and decide on value of certain things. And this is one of the most important values of a commons. It provides a base from which people can start to collaborate from. What about the commoners, the people who live in this commons? So I've stolen some images, well, reused some images from GitHub. It's my favorite place in the internet. And these are kinds of people who would live and work in our commons. We've got educators, we've got researchers, we've got developers, and we've got operators. And all of these people need to work together. What are the implications for these? I go into some detail, and you can find the link in the slides offline about how I feel that this should be implemented, and this is kind of the basis for a new strategy in terms of distributed computing in South Africa. So let's go a bit into detail. What are the implications for teaching and research if we have a system which is also a commons? Teaching and research can be done in the same environment, first of all. You don't have to suddenly jump from university to the special thing, the special national infrastructure, if it's done in a commons. There is a path to scale from university activities or group resources to national or regional infrastructure, and we've seen this. We know that it can bring great benefit. More importantly, though, the skills that are taught, there's some feedback to them. Sorry, I misspelled fade. Remember, one of the one of the characteristics of a complex adaptive system is that it has feedback. It has also self-feedback. So the students can say, listen, we know that there's this new technology. Why aren't you teaching us this in the university? Because we want to be able to use it on our infrastructure when we get out of university. So there's feedback in the system. You can enable open science with the commons. There's this idea that you can fork science. If somebody publishes the entire procedure with the way by which they arrived at a conclusion, you can change something, come to a new conclusion, but nevertheless reference the original work. That's called forking of an idea, right? So science, we know, faces a reproducibility crisis, and if our infrastructure is not geared up to enable reproducibility, in other words, it must have provenance, it must have identity, it must be able to store data for a very long time, then we won't be able to fork science, and so our science will be less reliable. We also want our science to be reproducible. Beyond that, it should be discoverable, as we've seen in the case of the APHRC, citable in the same case, executable in the sense of some semantic execution, and accessible. Shouldn't be hidden behind some institutional gateway. We can fork science, and that's a very, it's an idea that people accept, but can you fork infrastructure? So all of the technical know-how that we've developed while building these things, is that also a transferable idea? It turns out it is. NICIS is national infrastructure, but it's not even the biggest infrastructure, because things like the LHC and SKA, which are active in our region, are building far bigger infrastructure. And we want to be able to use the tools that they've designed in a commons, at least the components which are cross-cutting. Okay? So these new techniques and technologies were invented in these large projects, and if there's no way to easily have an osmosis between parallel infrastructure and the commons, then we've failed. So we need to be able to have open source infrastructure. This little green button here is the best thing you can ever see as a developer. It means that whatever code you've written has been executed, has been tested, and is passing. So we're actually doing that with our infrastructure. Before we deploy a service, it's tested, and when that test passes, it goes into production. So we can say to the user, we have tested this infrastructure first before it goes in there. And all of this code is on GitHub. So that code represents, in a semantic state, our infrastructure. It is our infrastructure. Oops. Finally, some implications for the economy, right? So we know that we have to generate many new PhDs to make a knowledge economy, but unfortunately, we've seen in Europe that the PhDs have nowhere to go. There's a major crisis also in the States. The problem is that there's no new jobs. There's no new kinds of jobs. So a commons means that you can easily transfer expertise across boundaries. The technical things that you learn in one idea can be shared with people from another domain, and you can, and vice versa, learn this. This is the idea of barter, okay? Not just across methodologies and technologies, but also across institutes, if we have a commons. So you can create this overlap of a career between someone who's not a coder, but also not a system administrator. He's an infrastructure architect. So that professional career didn't exist a couple of years ago, and now we can make new jobs for people. The same goes for software and for research software. There's those who write the code and those who do the science, but there are also those who do both. And we call them research software engineers. And they also didn't exist 5 years ago. Some people might call these data scientists. And we've seen the huge explosion of the demand for these kinds of people. So that can only be done in a commons. You can't do that when you're designing, no matter how wonderful it is, a vertically integrated infrastructure. 2 thoughts before I close off. So implications for the region, our region being the sub-Saharan African region. Is NICIS a commons? You might say, well, you've said all these great things, but are you actually a commons? No, it's not a commons, but it provides order, one of the fundamental requirements of having creativity in the system. So without NICIS, we can never have a commons. Is there a regional commons? We have developed through Chainraids the Africa-Arabia Regional Operations Center, which provides coordination and provides a bit of structure to the resources which are there. We've also been working very closely with DGI.eu and their FedCloud activity to bring new technologies into the region which we have. So no, there's no commons just yet. And you might next ask, what's taking you so long? Well, there is a factor which has been going on since just after the war called the erosion of the commons. There is a war between those who would have a commons and those who would privatize. And no side is correct, but we know that without aspects of a commons, without aspects of sharing, without the structure that enables this kind of thing, there can be no exchange and no commerce of ideas. That's very bad for science. So this graph that you see is the usage of the term the commons in English literature since 1800. And I invite you to reflect upon this. To draw my conclusions, a commons is a good thing. It's not the only thing that's necessary, but without it, very bad things happen. It allows sharing, community development, but most of all, specialization. Cyber infrastructure itself is complex, and we need to recognize that fact and treat it as it is. It's no use making simplistic models out of it. It needs to be addressed as a system, which South Africa is trying to do. Placing the right constraints on it can actually make it generate output, do some work. Cyber infrastructure is expensive, but it's also cross-cutting. That means that if you invest in it once, you can actually see the return many times. Cyber infrastructure is also public, and the concepts of public infrastructure, like railroads, police, that kind of thing, should, I think, also be applied to cyber infrastructure. And that is ideas of openness, accountability, transparency, constituency, most of all. These are crucial to success. And please check in with us next year to see how we're doing, because we're not there yet. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for this uncommon talk. And the floor is now open for questions or comments. Yes, one.
Hi, my name is Sanam. I'm here in name or on behalf of the WHO, and I'm an intern. So I don't have anything important to say. It's also not my domain. I'm studying intercultural relations management. However, I wanted to make only one comment that a young spirit wanted to share with the whole room of these wonderful professionals. And that's that I really enjoyed this presentation and creative explanation about commons and how inclusive this concept is. And I really hope that you can elaborate this project and this concept further in the future. And I just wanted to share that as a young spirit who cannot follow in this topic could follow perfect what you wanted to say, and that I can see the vision of this concept. So,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will distribute the slides just to respond quickly. Within the slides is a link to a very detailed philosophical rant about how I feel about the commons.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm getting up. It's a question of elementary courtesy. Sorry. My apologies because I came in rather late. I was attending another meeting at the European Parliament, and I can't be two places at the same time. Yes. Yes, sorry. My name is Professor Linson. I am from the IMNRC Newport Network. I am a neuroscientist, and the IMNRC Newport Network is interested in interfaces. And I'm directing 3 successful projects, one on smart cities, the other on the education and the governance of tomorrow, the new capacity building program with 130 countries participating, and one on cancer. Now, what's the future of, where will all the PhDs go? I'm feeling uncomfortable with this question. And also, you speak of easy transfer expertise. I understand what you mean. But the problem is that the issues we are faced with today have reached such a level of complexity that experts, academics, politicians, and the audience are getting completely out of their depth. Why? Because they are faced with integrated interdisciplinary challenges, something that their education does not prepare them for. The existing educational system is not sufficiently powerful to enable us to deal with the complexities of the challenges we are faced with. It is absolutely essential to turn to the education of tomorrow, and this means developing the human beings integrated into disciplinary potential. Thank you. And unfortunately, there are no existing institutions yet that provide this kind of training, excepting perhaps the creation of interdisciplinary bubbles, like Horizon 2020, which is why I'm horrified with Horizon 2020. Okay.
Thank you. Excuse me, I'm back to still chain reds, but it's a challenging question. In the context of this cyber infrastructure you want to put in place in South Africa, how and on which principles would you manage the identities? In South Africa, the identities are not managed well. I could give you details you easily can understand. So what is the evolution? And this has to span across the society, the economy, the legal system, as well as the use and access to the data.
So it's no use putting in place a system which has not been shouted for. And the reason that we have such a low level of infrastructure in South Africa is because there's no demand for that. And we know why that is. That's because politicians would like us to be ignorant, and that's been the case in many countries. Things like the SKA and huge factors which drive us away from equilibrium are the ones which force us to implement proper solutions. Now, the issue of identity is one thing. Obviously, we have laws about privacy and so on, but these don't really bother scientists, except in very specific domains, like biomedical research and legal research. We've had to deal with this in terms of the APHRC use case, where they weren't going to expose who was using their data. You should only be able to access the cleaned data. We don't have an answer for this. What we do have is technology and methodology to implement the solutions in a way that can respond to the needs of the use case. But again, that has to come from the user's point of view, right? So in our specific case in South Africa, it took the SKA, which in some people's opinion is not such a good idea, but it took the SKA to really make infrastructure happen in South Africa. It's kind of like running the World Cup.
Any other? Yeah. Last question for this presentation. Please, please.
Thank you. I forgot. I am Maria de Lourdes Spencer Lopez dos Santos from Cape Verde Islands. I am a pathologist and I work in the National Public Health Institute. For me, for your explanation, all the conclusions are important, but for me, the force is very essential for all of us. Open exchange, create lively ecosystems. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that we should move on with the program. So let's thank again the speaker.